I touched my daughter's husband's face in a way I hadn't touched a man in 15 years. His eyes, those eyes that should have been forbidden, held mine with an intensity that made my wedding ring feel like it was burning into my skin, and when he stepped toward me, I didn't step back. They say the most dangerous affairs begin with the smallest betrayals. A glance held too long. A touch that lingers when it should retreat. Words spoken in tones reserved for lovers, not family. I never understood how someone could risk everything for a moment of connection until I became that someone. My name is Rebecca. My marriage to James lasted 20 years, produced our beautiful daughter Olivia, and died long before either of us had the courage to acknowledge it. Not with arguments or slammed doors. Those at least would have proven we still had passion. No, our marriage faded into polite conversation about grocery lists and weather forecasts. A roommate arrangement with shared tax returns. I was 45 when Olivia married Nathan. They were young, perhaps too young, but so obviously in love that it made my chest ache with both joy and envy. At their wedding, I watched James toast mechanically, his eyes already checking his watch, wondering when we could leave. I searched his face for any sign of emotion, any flicker of the man who once looked at me the way Nathan looked at our daughter. There was nothing. That night in our hotel room, I stood before the bathroom mirror, door cracked open, watching James slip into bed without a word. The silence between us had a weight all its own. Heavy, suffocating, familiar. "Do you remember our wedding night?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the running water. He grunted non-committally, already reaching for his phone. It was a long time ago. A long time ago. For words that dismissed 2 decades of my life. I turned off the faucet and watched the last droplets cling to the porcelain before surrendering to gravity. Like hope, I thought. It hangs on until it simply can't anymore. The invitation to Nathan and Olivia's housewarming came 3 months later. They'd bought a charming colonial just 20 minutes from our home. Close enough for Sunday dinners but far enough for privacy. I spent the morning baking Olivia's favorite lemon tarts, while James made excuses about a work emergency. "It's your daughter's first home," I said, not looking up from my mixing bowl. "She'll understand. The Morrison account can't wait." His tone left no room for argument. Never did. I drove alone, the passenger seat filled with housewarming gifts instead of conversation. When I arrived, Olivia threw open the door, her smile faltering slightly when she saw I was alone. "Dad's working," I explained before she could ask. "Again?" She sighed, taking the bags from my hands. "Well, you're here. That's what matters." The house was buzzing with friends and relatives, conversations flowing with the wine. I moved through the rooms, admiring what they'd done with the place, exchanging pleasantries with faces I recognized from the wedding. But I felt like a ghost drifting through someone else's life. Present but not quite real. It was in the kitchen that I first truly saw Nathan. Not as my daughter's husband, but as a man. He was arranging cheese on a platter, his sleeves rolled up, forearms flexing slightly with each careful placement. Sunlight from the window caught in his dark hair, highlighting strands of copper I'd never noticed before. "Need any help?" I offered, setting my empty wine glass on the counter. Nathan looked up, his smile warm and genuine. "Rebecca?" "Yes, actually. Olivia's entertaining the Thompson family, and I'm hopelessly overmatched by this cheese board." I moved beside him, our shoulders almost touching as I rearranged the brie and grapes. "The trick is to create height," I explained, stacking crackers artfully. "The eye needs somewhere to travel." His gaze followed my hands, then lifted to meet mine. "You're good at this. I've hosted my share of parties. James is missing out." The simple observation carried more weight than Nathan could know. "He usually does," I said softly, then regretted the admission. Nathan paused, studying my face with an intensity that made my skin warm. His loss. Something shifted in that moment, tiny, imperceptible, but real. A door opening where there should have been a wall. We carried the finished platter to the dining room together, his hand brushing against mine as we set it down. The contact was brief, milliseconds of skin against skin, but electric enough that I stepped back too quickly, nearly knocking over a vase of sunflowers. Nathan steadied it with one hand, the other instinctively catching my elbow. "Careful," he murmured, his voice lower than before. His fingers lingered on my arm a heartbeat longer than necessary. "Mom!" Olivia appeared in the doorway, flushed with excitement. "Come meet our neighbors." The moment broke. Nathan released my arm and I followed my daughter, the ghost of his touch still humming on my skin. That night, driving home to my silent house, I caught myself touching the spot on my elbow where his fingers had been. I jerked my hand away as if burned, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. "What's wrong with you?" I scolded myself. He was being polite. "He's your son-in-law, your daughter's husband." But as I pulled into our driveway, seeing the darkened windows of our house, I couldn't deny the flutter in my chest when I recalled Nathan's words. His loss. James was already asleep when I slipped into bed, his back to my side of the mattress, the gulf between us as vast as an ocean. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when we'd stop trying to bridge that distance, wondering if either of us even wanted to anymore. The Sunday dinners became a tradition. Each week, I arrived at Olivia and Nathan's home with carefully prepared dishes and hopeful questions about whether James might join us this time. Each week I arrived alone. Olivia's disappointment became resignation, then acceptance. "Dad's always been work-focused," she'd say, shrugging as if it didn't hurt. But Nathan noticed. He'd watch me arrive, carrying casserole dishes and forced smiles, and something in his eyes told me he saw beyond the brave facade. "Let me help with that," he'd say, taking the dishes from my hands, his fingers warm where they met mine. One Sunday in late autumn I arrived early. Olivia's car wasn't in the driveway. "She's running late at the farmer's market," Nathan explained, ushering me in from the crisp air. Something about finding the perfect pumpkins. The house felt different without Olivia's energetic presence. Quieter, more intimate. Nathan took my coat, his hands gentle as he slid it from my shoulders. The back of his fingers grazed my neck, and I suppressed a shiver that had nothing to do with the October chill. "Wine," he offered, leading me to the kitchen where a bottle of Merlot was already breathing. "Please." He poured 2 glasses, his movements deliberate, graceful. When he handed me the wine, our fingers overlapped around the stem. "How are you, Rebecca?" "Really?" His eyes searched mine, seeing past the automatic "fine" that hovered on my lips. I looked down at the deep red liquid in my glass. "I'm..." The truth rose in my throat before I could swallow it back. "Lonely." The admission hung in the air between us. Nathan didn't rush to fill the silence with platitudes or awkward reassurances. He simply nodded, as if confirming something he'd long suspected. "James is a fool," he said finally, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. I looked up sharply. "Nathan, I'm sorry." He stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "That was inappropriate. It's just..." He paused, struggling. "I see you, Rebecca. How you light up a room. How you listen when someone speaks like they're the only person that matters. How you notice the small things everyone else misses." His eyes held mine with painful honesty. And I don't understand how he doesn't see it too. The air between us became charged, thick with unspoken possibilities. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips, in my throat, behind my eyes. This was the moment to laugh it off, to change the subject, to maintain the boundaries that kept our family whole. Instead, I whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Nathan moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, sandalwood and something citrusy, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, close enough that if either of us leaned forward just slightly, the sound of tires on gravel shattered the moment. We stepped apart as if pushed by invisible hands. By the time Olivia bustled through the door, arms laden with pumpkins and gourds, Nathan and I were on opposite sides of the kitchen island, sipping wine, pretending our world hadn't just tilted on its axis. Throughout dinner, I felt Nathan's gaze on me when Olivia wasn't looking. I carefully avoided meeting his eyes, focusing on my plate, on my daughter's animated stories about the farmer's market, on anything but the magnetic pull I felt toward the man sitting across from me, my daughter's husband. Driving home, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. What had almost happened? What was I allowing myself to feel? The logical part of my brain screamed warnings, painted vivid pictures of the devastation such feelings could cause. But beneath those warnings ran an undercurrent of something I hadn't felt in years: desire. Not just physical, but the deep, aching desire to be truly seen by another person. James was working in his home office when I returned, door closed as usual. I knocked softly. "Come in," he called, not looking up from his computer. I stood in the doorway, still wearing my coat. "I'm home. How was dinner?" He continued typing, eyes on the screen. "It was nice. Olivia made pot roast." I paused. "She missed you." His fingers stilled momentarily. "I'll try to make it next week." We both knew he wouldn't. "James." My voice cracked slightly. "Are we okay?" He finally looked up, confusion crossing his features. "What do you mean? Us? This marriage? Are we?" I gestured helplessly. "Are we even trying anymore?" He sighed, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "Rebecca, it's been a long day. Can we not do this now?" It was the answer I expected, yet it still cut deep. "When, James? When is the right time to talk about the fact that we're like strangers living in the same house? You're being dramatic." His tone was dismissive, the same tone he used when telling telemarketers he wasn't interested. "We've been married 20 years. We're comfortable." "Comfortable," I repeated. "Is that what this is? What do you want from me?" Irritation crept into his voice. "We have a good life. Nice house, successful daughter. What more do you need?" I need to feel alive again, I thought. I need someone to look at me the way Nathan did today, like I matter. But I said nothing. I simply closed the door and walked away. That night I dreamed of Nathan's hands on my shoulders, his breath against my neck, his voice saying my name like a prayer. I woke gasping, shame and desire battling for dominance in my chest. The text came 3 days later. "Olivia's stuck at work. Can you drop off the book she borrowed? I'll be home." It was innocent, practical, a simple favor for my daughter. But my heart raced as I typed my reply. "Of course. I'll come by after lunch." I changed my outfit twice before settling on a soft blue sweater that brought out my eyes. I applied lipstick, then wiped it off, then applied a different shade. I told myself it was normal to want to look nice when leaving the house. I almost believed it. Nathan answered the door in jeans and a white t-shirt, so simple yet somehow devastating. His face brightened when he saw me, a smile spreading slowly across his features. "Rebecca," he said, my name in his mouth sounding different than when anyone else said it. "Come in." I stepped inside, clutching Olivia's book like a shield. "I can't stay long." "Of course." He took the book, his fingers brushing mine deliberately. "But at least have some coffee?" "I just made a fresh pot." I should have declined. Should have made an excuse about errands or appointments. Instead, I followed him to the kitchen, watching the easy grace with which he moved through the space. He handed me a mug, the ceramic warm against my palms. Our fingers touched again, and this time neither of us pretended it was accidental. I haven't stopped thinking about what you said, Nathan admitted, leaning against the counter. About being lonely. I stared into my coffee. I shouldn't have said that. Why not? It was honest. He moved closer, not touching me but near enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Honesty is rare. Honesty can be dangerous, I whispered. He was silent for a moment. What if I told you I feel it too? This connection between us. My eyes snapped up to meet his. Nathan, we can't. Olivia, I know. The conflict in his expression mirrored the war raging inside me. God, Rebecca, don't you think I know that? I love Olivia. But this thing between us, I've never felt anything like it. It's just attraction, I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. It happens. It will pass, will it? His voice was soft, challenging. It's been months, and it's only getting stronger. I set my coffee down, needing to put distance between us. But as I turned, Nathan reached for my hand, his touch sending electricity up my arm. Rebecca, just my name, but in that moment it contained multitudes. I turned back, and he was closer than I expected, his eyes dark with an emotion that made my breath catch. We should stop this, I murmured, even as I swayed toward him. We should, he agreed, his free hand coming up to brush a strand of hair from my face. Time suspended as we stood there, balanced on the knife edge of decision. His thumb traced my cheekbone, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. I closed my eyes, letting myself feel everything I'd been denying for months. The sound of a car door slamming jolted us apart. Olivia's voice called from the front of the house. Nathan? Mom's car is here. Are you guys home? Reality crashed back with devastating force. Nathan stepped away, his expression shifting from desire to guilt so quickly it would have been comical in any other circumstance. In the kitchen, he called back, his voice admirably steady. I busied myself with my coffee mug, heart hammering against my ribs as my daughter appeared in the doorway. Mom, you didn't have to wait for me. I know you're busy. Olivia kissed my cheek, then moved to Nathan, rising on tiptoes to kiss him too. The simple gesture was a dagger to my heart. What had I been thinking? This was my child, my baby girl, whose happiness I'd vowed to protect from the moment she drew her first breath. I was just having coffee, I managed, amazed at how normal my voice sounded. I should go. So soon. Olivia looked disappointed. I thought maybe we could have lunch. I have errands, I lied, unable to meet Nathan's eyes. Rain check. As I drove home, tears blurred my vision. The gravity of what had nearly happened, what I had allowed myself to feel, crushed the air from my lungs. I pulled over to the side of the road, put my head on the steering wheel and sobbed. This couldn't continue. I needed to fix my marriage or end it, but I would not become the woman who betrayed her own daughter. That night I tried again with James. I cooked his favorite meal, wore a dress I knew he once liked, even lit candles at the dining table. He noticed enough to raise an eyebrow. What's the occasion? No occasion, I said, pouring wine. I just thought it would be nice. He nodded absently, already reaching for his phone to check emails between bites. James, I said quietly, could we leave the phones away from the table? Just for tonight. He looked surprised, then slightly annoyed, but complied. Everything okay? I don't know, I answered truthfully. Are we okay? He sighed. This again. Yes, this again. I set down my fork. When did we stop talking to each other? Really talking, not just exchanging information. James leaned back in his chair, studying me as if I were a puzzling client brief. People change, Rebecca. We're not in our 20s anymore. full of drama and grand passions. This is what long-term marriage looks like. No, I said, surprised by my own certainty. This is what giving up looks like. His eyes narrowed. Where is this coming from? Is something going on I should know about? The question hung in the air like smoke. For a terrifying moment, I considered telling him everything. About Nathan. About the feelings that were threatening to consume me. About the loneliness that had driven me to this precipice. Instead, I asked, "Do you still love me, James?" The pause before he answered told me everything I needed to know. "Of course I do," he said finally, but the words sounded rehearsed, obligatory. "We've built a life together." "That's not what I asked." He set his napkin down beside his plate. "What do you want me to say, Rebecca? That I still feel the same butterflies I did when we were 25? That's not realistic." "I'm not asking for butterflies," I said, my voice steady despite the crumbling sensation in my chest. "I'm asking for presence, for effort, for you to look at me, really look at me, and see something more than a convenience." "That's not fair, isn't it?" I challenged. "When was the last time you asked about my day and actually listened to the answer? When was the last time you touched me because you wanted to, not because it was Friday night and that's our routine?" James pushed away from the table. "I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but I don't appreciate the accusations." "They're not accusations. They're observations." I stood too, gathering the barely touched plates. "And the fact that you can't even have this conversation without getting defensive proves my point." He left the room without replying, the soft click of his office door more final than any slam could have been. I washed the dishes methodically, tears streaming silently down my face. By the time I finished, I had made my decision. The next morning, I called a lawyer. 2 weeks later, I sat across from James at the same dining table, separation papers between us. He looked more bewildered than hurt, as if he couldn't quite believe this was really happening. "You're serious about this?" he said, a statement rather than a question. I nodded. "I deserve more than being tolerated, James. And honestly, so do you." He signed the papers without further argument, his expression thoughtful. "I never meant to make you feel invisible." "I know. And I did." James wasn't a villain. He was simply a man who had stopped trying, who had mistaken comfort for fulfillment. Perhaps I had too, until Nathan had awakened me to the difference. Nathan. Even now, with my marriage ending, I knew I couldn't pursue what I felt for him. The cost was too high. Olivia's happiness was not a price I was willing to pay, no matter how powerful the connection. I moved out the following weekend, into a small apartment with large windows and a balcony overlooking a park. Olivia helped me unpack, her face a mix of sadness and concern. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" she asked, arranging books on a shelf. "You and Dad were together forever." "That's part of the problem," I explained gently. "We stayed together because it was easier than admitting we'd grown apart." She nodded, absorbing this. "Nathan thinks you're being brave." My heart stuttered at his name. "Does he?" "He says everyone deserves to be with someone who sees them for who they really are." She smiled sadly. "I hope Dad finds that too." The irony nearly broke me. When she left, I stood on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. My phone buzzed with a text. "Are you settling in okay, Nathan?" I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keys. A reply would be innocent enough. Concerned son-in-law checking on his mother-in-law during a difficult time. But we both knew it would be more than that. I deleted the message without responding and blocked his number. Then I called my daughter. "Can we have lunch tomorrow?" I asked when she answered. "Just the two of us? I'd like to talk about setting some new boundaries now that your father and I are separated." "Of course, Mom." Olivia's voice was warm with love. Anything you need. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. The loneliness was still there, a familiar companion, but it was no longer suffocating. It was just space. Space to breathe, to heal, to rediscover who I was outside of a marriage that had long since lost its heartbeat. I knew there would be difficult days ahead. I knew there would be moments when the pull toward Nathan would feel irresistible. But I also knew something else. The woman who had touched her daughter's husband's face with desire was not the woman I wanted to be, so I chose a different path. I chose my daughter. I chose myself. And in that choice, I found a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The most dangerous affairs, they say, begin with the smallest betrayals. But sometimes the greatest acts of love begin with the hardest choices. And in the end, it's those choices, not the momentary feelings, that define who we truly are.